going live. This is a little experiment, another experiment. Pour one out for Cloud Foundry After Dark.
What isn't an experiment between us, Shafe? I mean, this whole thing started off with me in Minnesota on a Hangout, and we went from there.
Well, I guess a little something happened last week. Might have been interesting to people trying to build stuff.
Town, or what happened? I forget.
Yeah, I think you went out with your aunt, walked her dog or something.
Something like that. We went to the beach. No, I was in Washington, D.C. for a solid 6 days, and spent really one of the best weeks of my career, I think, and at SpringOne. And the theme of the whole conference was Get Cloud Native, and it was the cool thing was it was about 1,100 developers, all who paid $1,700 to be there because it's professional development for them. Like, it's not a casual Clouderati kind of conference where people go to just hang out at conferences.
What do you mean? You think those are free? What are you talking about?
Well, I guess I'm saying, like, this is we kind of cap it around 1,000 people so that we can find a space big enough because we do dinners and everything else together. Very collegial kind of conference. And the theme was Cloud Native, and it was pretty unbelievable, the momentum behind Spring Boot, as well as the interest in Spring Cloud, which is obviously newer and just about to be GA. And the coolest thing, one of the coolest things, was that the guys from Alibaba, who are a pretty massive web scale company, obviously, most valuable company in China, I think, publicly traded. They were there, and they had met Josh Long about a quarter ago, and he had told them all about the magic of the boot and the cloud. And they had decided to change over the new AliExpress stuff that they're doing in the US to compete with Amazon, to be all microservices based using Spring Boot and Spring Cloud. So
boot to the cloud.
Yeah, that was really cool that they just showed up. So I'm sitting there at a fish restaurant in DC, and the lead architect of Alipay sitting there next to me, like, really excited. And then, one of the cooler things was just watching how the Spring Boot and Spring Cloud teams have meshed with the Cloud Foundry teams at Pivotal, so that, like, hey, I'm building a new app, I need a Eureka push button click on, like, seconds.
So before we go dive too deep into some of the SpringOne stuff and, like, how those teams are meshing, let's just talk a little bit about, what we're trying to do with this experiment. And the Cloud Foundry After Dark, I think we had a good time, we had a good run, but it's also expanding, like, what we're thinking about and how we're thinking about, if you're looking at the way that kind of the Pivotal teams coming together across the platform team, what we're doing is kind of, it's broke through the boundary of just Cloud Foundry to something that's a bigger thing. And so we just wanted to open that up to have the conversations around, all this distributed system stuff, all this, like, process stuff, all the other things that we kind of related back to Cloud Foundry sometimes, that were, like, adjacent or peripheral, but we want to be able to focus on those and just have those conversations with those communities, bring those people on. We're, at least for today, because last time we did Cloud Foundry After Dark was such a Twilight Zone episode, I'll give anyone who tells me they want the link a link to join, but I'm not going to post it on Twitter today, just as an experiment, to see if we get a better result. And
we had some, like, porn bot invasion last week that was not fun, and was a little distracting. So, as surreally entertaining as it might have been,
the smoke rings were my favorite.
Yeah. So that's the lost episode. We have a link to it buried, but we will not make it public. If someone wants to,
it's not even unlisted. It's private. I've made it so you can't watch it.
Yeah. So you can't, if you want to gaze into, don't look into the ark, as they said in Indiana Jones.
Yeah. So coming back to what's going on with Spring, and this is this amazing thing, and it's really like the other side of the platform, right? You have to build apps that adhere to the contract, to the platform. And we're just seeing this explosion of what are essentially kind of out-of-the-box 12-factor apps coming from the Spring Boot adoption.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing that's happening, we have a big internal thread about 12-factor, and 12-factor is awesome, but is it good enough or sufficient even in this world today?
Well, the question really is, it like the end all be all of everything you should ever do, and like how do you frame a bunch of things about security, about all these other things that you have to be concerned with?
Really simply, core basic Cloud Foundry today uses environment variables that are there to configure the app at startup time. And that is 12-factor. That is how Heroku does it. That is how basic Cloud Foundry does it. When you go to Eureka in Spring Cloud, you now get live running app, service discovery, changes of environment variables, essentially like configuration to know what other services to talk to, that Eureka and Eureka Client dynamically reconfigure for you, like this with ribbon, client-side load balancing. So.
But that's an interesting discussion, right? Like this gets philosophical really fast. Does service discovery actually break 12-factor, or is it outside of the 12-factor? Like is injecting environment variables in the strictest sense of 12-factor the end of how that stuff should be configured?
I guess that's what I'm saying, which is, hey, Tushar.
Hey.
Is 12-factor is awesome, and if you didn't have at its core a 12-factor app, trying to take it to the dynamic service discovery layer, like Spring Cloud does, would totally not work, right? All of the stateless and configured and by that convention logic still applies. It's just you watch that and you're like, oh, that's some next level stuff. You know what I mean? Like that's a next level thing. And one of the live demos at SpringOne was live adding to running apps, and it's really amazing when you watch it happen. Like, hey, let's add a new service here. Okay, we configured Eureka for all the apps. Okay, now they're all finding it. Okay, now this is happening.
When you see the little self-replicating nanites, build the future themselves without any intervention, it's kind of impressive.
Yeah, and then you watch and you say, well, 12-factor doesn't have anything to say about circuit breakers, so. You got all these stateless processes, but when you assemble 10 of them and 2 of them fail, what are the other 8 supposed to do? So that's another place where I don't think that 12-factor was necessarily sufficient.
I mean, this is like really fast. It gets philosophical. Like, is that actually inside the purview of those factors, right? Like, architecture is never discussed. And conditional logic of a bunch of things is never discussed as part of 12-factor. So I think you could say that it's not strictly outside of that. It's just like that was never covered, right? And what I want to do, and this is kind of a blog post on this thread that's emerging, and I don't know how far we'll take this, but I basically feel like the 12-factor as it's framed is a lot of like, this is 12-factor and it means this, this, and this, but it's not really put in a way that is framing the cost and benefits of each of those choices.
Yeah.
And I really think that there's when you start talking about things like attaching volumes directly to containers, or policy-driven container-to-container networking, in a world where you have these things that have a little bit more information about their environment, you're starting to violate some of the principles of 12-factor. And so I think it'd be nice to have a framework of factors that are talking about the notion of the cost and the benefit of each factor, so that you can have that discussion about why you would choose to do something that violates one of them, or even extend them in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, I think those are 2 different questions, actually. I think one is, and me, I'm a little bit of a cloud native purist, which is I actually think that 12-factor is the right baseline foundation. So like, I am terrified of, we will at some point put persistence into containers in Cloud Foundry. But my warning to everyone is, use that for clustered data services. Do not use that for your app. Like, if you start, if you start writing apps that use that way, or you're like get tempted, like, hey, I got this old WebLogic thing, I'm just going to jam it in there. It's not 12-factor, but it'll be cool. You're going to lose some of the operational benefits of cloud native, and you're going to have re-implemented an infrastructure management system as opposed to an app management system. Because when the system fails, you're going to have to go back and fix at an infrastructure layer and recover it at an infrastructure layer, not an app layer.
I think that's a fair point, but if you actually think about what we're trying to do with Cloud Foundry and what all these organizations we're trying to help are trying to do, then you do have to provide that data service, right? Like the 12-factor, the factor that says you're going to write to this backing data service implies that that data service exists, implies that something provides that, and if that's not you, whether that's containers mounted in volumes or that's some other mechanism that can keep promises about that data, then what do you really have? You kind of have to solve that.
I didn't disagree with that. I said clustered data services, i.e.
No, I know. I'm just articulating it.
You implement data services with an algorithm that allows any node failure to not be a failure of the service. And that is really an interesting boundary, and there's a lot of databases out there that claim to do that, and everybody's Twitter buddy Afear has done some good research to prove that a lot of services don't keep that contract.
He's pretty much proven that almost none of them do. Right.
So you could say that in a sense this clustered data service is a unicorn that we're all out hunting Don Quixote style, and that we're meat spacing it till we get there. Which is why I think I like the very cautious nature of Bosch today, which is that it says I'll build clustered data services for you, and if a volume fails, I'm going to try to do everything I can to bring it back and to treat it as a stateful thing it's an infrastructure management layer. But to me, the interesting part of 12-factor is not so much that debate, because the 12-factor always said you'd have some back-end data store that you had to use. It's more of the plus side. You know what I mean? Okay, well, should things like dynamic search discovery in certain cases, like Eureka, be a best practice? When should you use that? Should Hystrix and circuit breakers be a best practice, and when should you use that? Because a lot of people that we talk to, they're doing an awesome thing, which is they're going out and they're writing 12-factor apps now. And I'd almost like to say, okay, that's your baseline, and then here's your,
Yeah, I guess this is where the philosophical discussion starts, because there's lots of best practices that are architectural that are not talked about in 12-factor, right? Where should you put your caching layer, or should you, or there's a bunch of stuff that I think is crucial to doing true scale-out cloud, highly available, do the right thing cloud architectures that aren't even hinted at by what people call 12-factor. So, where are you going to draw that line to have that discussion? I feel like, just to put it out there, I feel like there's a huge discussion that's missing from the whole industry around architectures in general. And when people talk about architecture, they're just the O'Reilly conference, and Matt gave a talk about some of the microservice stuff, and that's all interesting. I think it tends to generally talk about notion of architecture and not necessarily get into this interesting stuff around the system architecture. That's sort of little tribal knowledge that only people who've seen certain things seem to really understand.
Yeah.
Architectures in general. And when people... What was that?
Sorry, I was just getting a link to tweet, and it started playing the YouTube of you talking a second ago.
That happens.
All right, continue.
So let's go back to what we're talking about with I'm just watching the downloads on Spring Boot right now, and we're seeing roughly 30% growth month over month, which is exciting, and also an explosion of, you were just reading some of the names of people who are currently hiring for people that want to come build this kind of stuff, independent of anything to do with platforms or where they're going to run it.
Yeah, it's my buddy Spence, CIT Spence, just asked about what about database rollback, etc. And yeah, I think the database management in the cloud is its own company, and I think we're working on that problem. But that's a huge topic, and depends on the contract you want from your database, etc.
And it's not an easy problem, right? If that was an easy problem to solve, then a lot of people would have solved it already.
No, I think that's one of the reasons Afear was famous, is he pretty much owned everybody. He was like, all of these things are not what they seem.
Not what they claim.
Not what they claim. So you could say, is he a special genius, or is actually just there was so much hot air in the marketing that it just took a determined individual with a good tool to crack it.
Yeah, I think he brought a certain formality to the analysis that was lacking.
Exactly. He prosecuted the case, if that makes sense. Like he was like a prosecutor. He's like, I'm gonna lay out my evidence.
Let the record reflect.
Yes.
Exhibit A.
Wookiees don't live on Endor.
So Spencer, whoever else was watching, if you guys want the link, I will be more than happy to send it, and you can ask those questions in real time, and we could talk all about it.
Yeah, just throw shade for.
Or if you can message them, then you have the link too.
I do it. Yeah, I guess I do. Nick and Joy with the link.
And if we don't get enough people, maybe we'll just put it out there, and we'll just take our Twilight Zone chances.
Yeah, it's all good. I don't mind just talking to you. I didn't really enjoy the porn bots.
What about you, Tushar? You're a lurker.
Yeah, I actually, since I've been hearing about Spring so much, and like I just work on Cloud Foundry, I tried out Spring, and I was quite amazed at some of the things that it can do for you. Like I tried the MongoDB based REST example, and it just did everything for me. And I was like, this is not true. This cannot happen. And I actually went back and queried my database whether this actually went in. And it was quite amazing that I just need to define a class, and all of the configuration and all of the communication with Cloud Foundry happens like bam. You just like bind a service and it's all working now. That was
It's almost
quite,
like someone thought through this problem and solved it for you.
yeah, it's something like I feel it's a problem like as if you do web development like or any kind of web-based stuff, like this is like a standard problem. How do you connect this database to your class? And it's sometimes a hard problem. Like there are so many ways to do it, and you mess it up most of the times. And like this seemed to like just solve all my problems by like one command, and I was quite surprised by the magic that it did for me versus, and I could write Java in a text editor. That was like a big change.
So just out of curiosity, what did you do? Like go through one of the guides, or what was the?
Yeah, I went through one of the guides to like connect a Mongo backend to like basically how do you expose a REST API through a Mongo backend, and I just followed the example through and through. It was interesting that I was pairing with a friend, my friend who's like doing an MBA, doesn't have any idea about like programming. The 15-minute tutorial took me like about 6 hours to like explain what's exactly happening, but I had to explain things like what is a database and what is a like things like that low level, and I could get that person like up to speed in like 6 hours to like do their own application, like at least a REST API, and further working on that is something which.
So you taught your MBA friend how to build a REST API.
Yeah.
6 hours.
Yeah.
And you had Java and all the power of the JVM underneath you.
Yeah. And the thing was I didn't push the app to like Cloud Foundry then, but I just did it by my own later on, and it just like worked. I was quite surprised that it just worked.
And for people who are, they don't know you, they probably don't even know me or James either, but that's fine. Like you're working on the Cloud Ops team, right? Running Pill Web Services. So you're not doing Java database stuff. You just picked it up and tried to do it.
Yeah. I've done some backend stuff in the past, but that's been like a mess usually. Like as a proper developer also, it takes me like at least 2 to 3 days to get the abstractions correct and make sure everything connects correctly and just works correctly based on what I imagine it to be. Like I define a class, and for it to roll out till the database layer, usually designing it in the right way takes some time, especially if you're doing it for the first time. But this was like quite amazing. Like even as a person with some web development experience, it was quite amazing. So I'm playing around with it a bit more now and seeing what else is there in Spring to offer.
I posted this on Twitter on my own personal account. It's been a little while now, but I used to do Java kind of back-end development stuff going back to 2006 or so, and I kind of swore it off and got excited about Rails and some of this other stuff, and then now kind of watching what's going on with this I'm back interested again, and I kind of have a little side project I'm gonna try to do to get all that, back up to speed on all the Java stuff again. Because actually, the language itself has changed quite a bit since 2008 as well.
Well, you could, talking to the Spring team, I mean, these are some of the best Java programmers in the world, but they said in the post-Spring Boot era and in the era of Cloud Foundry, you can do live coding demos and live deploy demos like never before. Like the combination of Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, and Cloud Foundry together, like they did a keynote where they live built an app and added services to it while talking to each other on stage, binding it to Cloud Foundry things, then killing nodes and proving like the whole thing is resilient. And this is all like a 1-hour keynote with live coding. I've never seen so much live coding in my life. Like just like as a dude there, like I was really intimidated by how fast these guys were flying around IntelliJ while talking. But it didn't take much to get a lot of basic apps going. And so it's really changed Java development for a lot of people.
Yeah, the Josh Long show is something to behold.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And I think the reason I was here is a Spring Cloud developer in the flesh.
He's alive.
My steamboat friend.
Somewhat.
You didn't get to come to SpringOne, man. You missed out.
Yeah. The bad thing about SpringOne and its timing is it coincides with tax time. In September, so bad timing.
No worries. It was a pretty epic show, and one of the things that was cool in Schaefer was 2 of the Netflix engineers were there, and I did a podcast with them, and they talked about how Spring Cloud actually was such a nice abstraction that they wanted to use that entirely internally now. They had some existing Netflix SDK and library stuff that they'd written to help glue all the Netflix OSS together before Spring Cloud. And they wanted to, they were in the process of already changing the entire getting started, and they said this in the podcast, the entire getting started experience as a Netflix developer to be like, hey, you start with Spring Boot, we give you Spring Cloud, now you wire up these things. And there's actually demo code that they, what they live coded at the show. Very impressively to add all these features. So it was really kind of for me, really incredible to have Alibaba and Netflix there sharing best practices on hyperscale web development with microservices, and it added a lot of credibility, I think, to the community that was already pretty robust.
Sure, it'll be interesting to see what their scale is.
Well, Alibaba said they demurred. They said, hey, the project we've built on Spring Boot and then we're adding Spring Cloud to, it only does $20 million in commerce a day right now.
Oh, that's all?
I said, oh. And if you go to the site, it's called Alipay. Or sorry, not Alipay. It's called AliExpress. It's their site in the United States and in Russia, and $20 million a day in e-commerce. So for them, that's small, I guess, but for me, that'd be a thing to behold.
I mean, this kind of goes back to the point I was making a minute ago about architectures, is when you're talking about scale, like any one Spring Boot process has to be, whatever, performant, but scale is a function of the architecture, right? Like you can get those things to scale to whatever if you understand like the basic principles of architecting these kind of systems.
Sure, and our approach isn't necessarily on the scale side. We're not worried about the scale. What we're more concerned with is once you take the investment of putting together microservices in the first place, actually using it to be able to put together pieces quickly, and then be able to tear it down or add it, or if it's a good idea, bad idea, it really doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, I have a number of presentations where I've been making the argument that the microservice architecture is a natural evolution of the architectures that you need to be able to scale, but also to move and change things quickly.
Yeah, that's our entire piece of it. Scale is not the problem. It's just the ability to, if someone comes to me and says, I want something new, I can do it quickly, like within a day or two, and that's it. It's just done. There's no real thought about it.
Yeah.
And if it's a bad idea, well, just tear it back down, and it didn't hurt anyone.
frictionless.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Donnie Berkowitz said, sounds like one of your guests is in Witness Protection Program. No, he's in Steamboat.
It's nice here. Leaves are changing.
Oh, yes, the fall.
I'm going to ask if he's joining.
Tell Donnie to come over.
I don't know, man. He was the one saying like he didn't understand platform and microservices together. He made me sad. I was like, dude, don't you understand? They do the availability at the Eureka and ribbon layer, bro. It's like you're not using infrastructure that's magic.
Yeah, he was rotating on this idea that it's not microservices unless it's like planetary scale, high availability.
Multiple region somehow was his definition, and I'm like, it can be done, but I think you can do a lot of damage before you get there.
I mean, you have to solve the small problem in the small before you can solve it, writ large anyway.
Yeah, gotta finish the talk.
See how you are.
Let's see what's going on here. He's finishing a talk on engineering trends in software development for 451 Research. Well, you better lead with.
Come on. Take a break for 15 minutes, Donnie.
That's fine. But I think it was a cool week, and the other thing was that I'm just looking right here. I think Spring Boot is really a great thing for the industry because one of the things that has really slowed down the relationship between developers and operations is that a lot of operations people have standardized in these archaic legacy systems like WebSphere and WebLogic. And I think one of the companies in the most awkward position right now is IBM because they've historically really tried to at least market themselves as leading edge in the new trends. So I was just looking to see if I can do a screen share.
You in fact can. I think it's also awkward in the sense that they're like until you had this kind of suite of tools that we're putting together now. What was your thing to standardize on? If you're doing Java in the enterprise and you go to the J2E route, until you have this cloud native conversation, cloud native architecture conversation, that was the logical conclusion.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like that was the way Java was designed for. Yeah, so that is create a 12-factor app using WAS and using WAS Liberty, microservices Monday. So they're definitely following our message on this. But I think the thing that's really awkward for them and must be tough is that Spring Boot has really become the atomic popular thing. And so Spring Boot, so people understand it, it embeds either Jetty or Tomcat or in the future Netty. These are the lighter and the ultralight Java app servers.
It's self-contained. It basically runs as a jar and it just does the HTTP as a process.
Exactly. And so what's happened though is that this is so cool because it has as many operational impacts about how you deploy and update your Java code as it does developer impacts in terms of the benefits to Charsaw in terms of quickly writing it.
Exactly. It's a process you can understand in kill -9, and you're not like trying to go through another layer or two layers of abstraction to figure out what's going on.
So I called it on stage in the keynote the little viral bulldozer, because what happens is it goes around getting all the developers excited about it, but then when they go to operationalize it, all of a sudden the heavyweight operations teams, there's a lot of operations teams that had biased themselves towards, hey, I know how to run WebSphere, I'm a WebSphere admin, I know how to run, WebLogic, I'm a WebLogic admin, and they kind of push back on the teams. With Spring Boot, the whole thing flows from version control to running, exactly kind of as the developers configured it, or is it self-configured? So I think it's an awkward position for IBM and for, I think, Oracle less so, because Oracle has been kind of giving up. Like, I don't know if you saw, they laid off a lot of their Java team, people that we hired. But it wasn't just the evangelists. They laid off, like, leadership, and they're kind of like treating it as a cash cow to bleed out. They're like, hey, if we don't win the next generation, fine, but we'll bleed the cash cow out. I think IBM genuinely has been trying. to get to the next generation turn, but it must be incredibly awkward when they're like, yeah, and by the way, use Spring Boot with embedded Jetty for all of your Java. That must just be like.
Well, I mean, on the same theme, I saw someone posted a blog post where they're like, run Spring Boot in Docker, and I'm like, okay, why? Like, what did you?
Bridget could help that. Well, that post was actually IBM, and they were saying run Spring Boot and Docker. And the reason they said that was because in the way they use Cloud Foundry, their default Java build pack is based on WebSphere. So, ipso facto, when you try to use Spring Boot on their build pack, it don't work. And so their way around it was to give you a container interface. By the way, hi Bridget, where are you?
Hi, I'm in a hotel hallway in London.
It's morning in London.
It is. It's 7:29 in the morning. I didn't want to wake Joe up, so I figured I could sit out in the hallway. But
I found my passport, so I could travel.
I'm very excited that Andrew found his passport. I mean, granted, Andrew surprised me by looking for his passport like 2.5 days before he needed it.
Yeah.
So he would have given himself plenty of time to solve it if he needed to.
I'm full on adulting over here.
You're adulting hardcore over there in California, where it's not even midnight yet, right?
Not quite.
Oh my goodness. I'm really interested in what you just said about them deciding IBM is trying to rub some Docker on it now. Like, is that their solution?
No, it's just a blog post where they had the blog post. I think the title was actually "Run Spring Boot in Docker," but my point is, because the jar is actually executable as a unit. Like I don't see the benefit of wrapping it in a containerized environment personally.
Right. I mean, because with a containerized environment, of course, you get the benefits of bringing all your dependencies with you, which you already have with a jar.
Yeah, the jar. These are fat jars. They have the dependencies.
And thus you understand what Spring Boot is, Bridget. It is the Docker of the Java community, which is like, I got everything I need. I can take it wherever I like.
Hilarious.
It is. It's a little viral, like, oh, I got my package. Okay, here you go. I'm configured.
Oh, so I see Tushar over there, so I totally want to know. I saw Tony saying some stuff about how Pivotal Web Services survived the AWS sadness of the last day. And I would love to hear from Tushar, just because I suspect that some of the Bosch and Cloud Foundry stuff there probably helped a lot.
Yeah, we actually did a scale test to like scale up to 2,000 VMs with Bosch, and it just worked. Except we ran into some AWS rate limiting, but we added a bug or kind of a feature request in the AWS CPI to retry automatically if you run into rate limiting from AWS. So that's
great, because I know I was talking to the folks from my old gig, and they were talking about how AWS having problems in their API because of dependencies internally on Dynamo and whatnot. I know, total topic shift from what we were just talking about, and we can go back to that. I was just curious,
no,
it's nice that you can hit all of those API endpoints that Amazon will be sometimes flaky on when it's having those problems. And was this something that required a lot of manual intervention, Tushar?
Not really, as we didn't have much manual intervention. It was just we wrote a script that retries the deploy multiple times. So,
well, there's two things. One was we were doing a scale test, and I think Bosch easily did 2,000 VMs under management, no problem, which was a little bit bigger than some of the environments we've been running. And then, Tushar, I don't know if you were hands-on keyboard at all or knew at all today, like when the Amazon outage was happening, how the system responded to that and what that looked like.
No, I don't think I was there today. Well, somebody else was on call, I guess.
But his point is totally valid, though, because one of the problems with this particular outage was that autoscaling was broken, and the ability to manually spin up new instances was also hanging most of the time. So
we didn't understand the first part of your question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Probably because I just woke up and was sitting here having no longer on call survivors. Oh, okay. The first part of my question was just I was wondering how Pivotal Web Services, the hosted offering, survived the fun AWS outage that just happened. And
I was using PDubs all day. Like I didn't see anything, and my inbox isn't full of a bunch of prod alerts or any escalations. So I haven't talked to Tim, but I get all of our prod alerts, and I didn't get anything.
Yeah, well, it would make a lot of sense from what Tushar was just saying. If it's easy to scale out, then some of the problems around the scaling inside Amazon become less of a problem.
I mean, I think part of it is that the things that Amazon was having a problem with aren't things that we depend on very much in the way that Pivotal Cloud Foundry is deployed. Just because you basically have this capacity deployed, you probably weren't hitting the issues, and there's also really like the metadata and like the data service stuff that was, we kind of manage a lot of our own data services and don't depend on the internal Amazon stuff. So
the who manages your availability.
I mean, it would be interesting to have whoever was on call and like know what they were seeing. I didn't see any emails or alerts either. So
yeah. Tony tweeted something which makes it sound like, I mean, they were noticing and monitoring it, but clearly it wasn't a devastating problem, which is great. I mean, if it took down like Amazon and if it took down Netflix and Airbnb to some extent, it was definitely not nothing.
yeah, I would love to have someone who actually has more information. I could just speculate.
Yeah. Anyway, so back to what you were saying. I was just super interested when I saw Tushar there. I was like, hey. So because I joined a little bit late, I woke up in the UK. The first thing I did, of course, is look at Twitter, as one does when one wakes up. And I saw a 27-second old tweet from James saying, Cloud Native After Dark getting started. And I thought, I'm missing the beginning. So for those of us just joining and playing the home game, can you give us a quick recap of the transition to this?
So basically, and we started a little bit of this, is Cloud Foundry is a great project. It's core to the Pivotal business. It's what we think about all the time. But then in the context of Cloud Foundry After Dark, there's all these adjacent conversations that we want to have. And we always are trying to drag it back to Cloud Foundry. But if we go to this new framing, then we can talk more about Spring unapologetically. We could talk about a bunch of other interesting things around, all this framing that we have in our kind of ideas about cloud native infrastructure automation, cloud native orchestration, cloud native application frameworks, and then, last but not least, my favorite topic, cloud native cultures. We can frame those things and have those conversations and be unapologetic about it without trying to drag it all back to relating about Cloud Foundry. So I thought it was sort of a liberating way to frame it.
If Kelsey wants to join and talk about Cloud Native and Abstract, I think that's cool too. And I think it's good to cast a bigger umbrella for sure. Not that my Cloud Foundry tattoo is going to be laser erased anytime soon.
Yeah, maybe we can get Craig from Google on here to tell us how he named the foundation.
Nice.
That story.
So speaking of what even is making this stuff operable, how's your talk coming, Andrew?
I have a process.
Is this the process where what were you telling Kelsey? You talk to yourself and rock back and forth or something?
Yeah. That might be happening. I have a little plane ride over the the Atlantic this time. To rock back and forth.
I did my keynote last week, the day before. I waited till the day before. I don't know if I was quite as severe as Schaefer, who literally waits to the hour before.
I'm giving a couple of talks after Schaefer's, and I have a bunch of slides, but I rearranged all of them last night, and I'm not happy with them. So I can cast no stones here.
I think part of it is I kind of give the talk in a running fashion to myself, and that's just how I do it. I aspire to one day practice a talk really well before I give it, but I mostly just talk to myself all the time, and then I just say those words out loud.
It's worked so far.
I don't know. It's we can't go back.
Only forward.
We've traveled too far.
We're gonna go song lyrics now.
I'm gonna go pure memes and lyrics from now on. References to video games are also acceptable.
I will never use a meme pick in any of my presentations. As much as I enjoy others doing it, I just can't lower myself to meme my way through a talk.
Oh, now
Lower
you're getting judgmental.
No, it's good. It's just not my style. You know what I mean? Like, I think I'm not really very funny, and so I wouldn't want to try to be funny because you got to play to your strengths. Like, if you get off your core, like Josh Long, he's always funny. Like, I was actually watching one of Josh's talks this time, and I'm like, this is a legitimately like comedy talented human. Like, this guy has good comedic timing, and so he did the sumo wrestler riding and superimposed into the jockey position on a horse to do a meme of a monolith. It was pretty funny. Like, so Josh totally has credibility to use that. If I try to do it, I'd be like kind of the lame. I couldn't pull it off. I can't believe Richard's in a hallway. That is dedication. I love this.
I mean, that's the thing is I think whenever people are giving presentations, it's really just about creating authenticity, whatever that means for you. And it took me more than one talk to figure out kind of what that means, and I don't know. And I think it's evolved, right? Like the way that you give talks should change every time, unless you're not. Like I don't think if you're not changing, you're basically done. So you should just retire. You should be learning new stuff. But
I'll claim an exception for the talk that I gave again the day after I gave it. It was not very different. I had not learned a lot of new stuff in that one day.
Yeah, well, sure.
Some, but not a lot.
So what is your talk about?
My talk has the rather pretentious title I'm going to have to try to live up to of distributed : of systems and teams. I struggled between the on and of, and I went with the of, which I think is a lot more highfalutin and head in the clouds and pretentious. Now I have to come up with something that works.
How many cap theorem references do you have?
I think there are 3 slides that have something to do with it right now, but that is kind of one of the things that I called out in my talk description. You ever do that thing where you read your talk descriptions, months later, and you're like, that sounds like a great talk. What was I planning to talk about?
I just do it as a courtesy to try to maybe almost talk about the thing I proposed.
Right, exactly. It's just I would like to know exactly what I wanted to talk about.
So
I'm a different person now, and everything is different, so I don't want to talk about exactly the same things.
My talk is entitled "What Even Is Operable," so I just went straight meme in the title, and then filled out.
Brace yourselves. Operations is coming.
It's true.
Yeah, I guess I memed.
There you did. Actually, when I was listening to the YouTube as I was like brushing my teeth, because I know none of you can smell my morning breath, but I don't want to sit here in the hall being like when I first wake up. So I was listening to the YouTube stream as I was like brushing my teeth before I came out to talk to you folks. And the one thing that stood out for me is when you were talking about, hey, this is easier to get ops people on board now because there were all of these like IBM WebLogic administrators or whatever who weren't as interested in the Spring stuff before, or weren't as interested in, I don't know, cloud native in general before. Does that change where the conversations start happening? Like, was it like the conversations would be with dev teams before and then later get the ops people on board? I mean, I'm just kind of wondering if like the Spring story changes anything with the way those conversations happen.
If anything, it went the other way. It got more devs. Go ahead. Sorry, James.
No, man, it's fascinating. I mean, I think to some extent we took a risk by talking about cloud at the Spring conference. If you look 3 or 4 years ago, like how you deploy and ran the code was not necessarily something anyone cared about deeply. And this year even, I think there was a minority, maybe 20% or 10%, that were like, what's cloud native, what's cloud? So I think there's still a lot of things to do. I think the thing that has helped is that really leading edge developers like Netflix, the development teams are the people coming out and saying, as you build your service, here are the things you build into it, like client-side load balancing, like multi-region service discovery, like Hystrix. And these are all there, so when something goes wrong, things keep working. And then it's like, what? Something goes wrong? Like, like there's this, like, you're developing code, and we're doing it because it's resilient and easy to deploy. What?
Wait, something goes wrong? What even is operable?
Exactly, and to me, the reason it was such a beautiful conference is that we're introducing these easier to deploy with Spring Boot, much less configuration, a lot easier to deploy code, and easier to operate, and as Spence said, easier to update as well, microservices. And it was kind of the cool thing, and what I liked about it as opposed to pure automation conferences is that everyone in that room was empowered to go write code that was going to be easy to deploy and easy to operate. Like, it was a decision they could go home and make. I'm going to go write cloud native code. And you weren't stuck with, like, automate the monolith kind of insanity.
So for the people who mostly want to focus on adding features, does that mean that they have to spend their time now thinking about how to make it operable, or is it just like something they get out of the box because of the Spring framework? Like, what is the difference there?
I mean, I'll let Andrew take a shot at this one.
I think that nothing makes the hard problems that are hard like immediately go away. But by building a lot of this stuff into the framework, what you're trying to do is make doing the right thing the easy thing. And I think that the Spring and Spring Boot in particular goes a long way towards getting you there. And if you look at the way that this evolved and the patterns that inspired this, and this was not just kind of made up as a thing to do. Like, this is adopted at Netflix, right? This is adopted at places who are building these things. And I think that and this is kind of the point I'm going to try to make in my talk on Thursday, is that the things that you try to automate are as important as the fact that you are trying to automate them, and that there's architectures that actively resist automation. So if you want to have these kind of operational efficiencies, then you need to have that side of the equation as much as, and I think that if you look at kind of DevOps in general as a movement, personally I feel like it rotated really hard on a bunch of this tooling without really ever filling in these gaps around the actual architectural question. And we're starting to see that emerge a bit from the microservices discussion. But when you think about what it takes to scale an application, and also what it takes to scale an organization, those architectures have a huge impact. And there's plenty of people who are like, there's a whole cottage industry right now that's all about, well, how do you scale Agile in the enterprise? And honestly, 9 times out of 10, your problem is your architecture is screwed. Like, you can't scale because your architecture prohibits you from actually working on this stuff.
And also, like you said, I mean, some things in your organization might prevent it too.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about Conway's law ruling everything around you, is that your organizational structure and your actual system structure are often very, very similar, if not identical. What did you just post, James?
I posted you can tweet it to people at home. It's the link to the sample code of the more resilient style of development that Netflix is using based off of Spring Boot and Spring Cloud. And I think what's really cool about the way Netflix works is that they don't have a lot of automation tool kind of centric discussions, right? Like, you never go to a Netflix talk and the punchline is CF Engine. You know what I mean? It's like you go to a Netflix talk and the punchline is, here's how we write our resilient microservices. And that interests me because I think there's a genuine chance to actually fix the problem, as opposed to cycling on a bunch of different semantics to try to capture the problem.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, and I got to watch some of this with the front row seat, is that Netflix early on got onto this pattern where you have this fully deployable like artifact, and they were doing it on VMs and not containers, but it was basically immutable infrastructure with VMs going back to like 2007, 2008 maybe. So very much what we're seeing emerge and really optimize, and some of the conversations are going around microservices and immutable infrastructure was sort of pioneered by some of the stuff that we saw going on at Netflix going back, that far. Certainly by 2010, like it was in full swing, and they were talking about this sort of, AMI-driven deployment artifact.
Which is actually kind of what we do now, except we progressed it to Docker.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I just didn't want to say that word that way.
You should talk about your setup. You use Spring Boot and Spring Cloud on Amazon ECS, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's Amazon ECS, all Docker containers. Could be a mixture of Spring Boot configured as Tomcat or just regular, I say Tomcat, as an executable jar, or sometimes we do WARs, depending on what the application is. If it needs JSP or something like that Spring Boot doesn't quite have in the jar yet.
And you lead a team of, it's primarily you with some offshore help, right? Like it's your
Exactly. Me in India.
You're a one-man army. You have your own website that does travel scheduling, right?
Exactly. And most of the work we're doing is a combination of back-end type systems. And right now the focus is automation. And a big pain point is, going back to the Agile, bringing microservices into Agile. If you get into this concept of projects and things of that nature, I've found that you end up with a kind of a constant roadblock. You're maintaining your Jira, for example, or something like that. You're maintaining that more than you're actually writing services, which seems to be a bit of an issue.
But what about the burn down charts?
You end up with 300 projects with burn down charts. The concepts now, when you have a service, let's say you have a index page service, and that's all it does. It's a UI service that does an index page. And so that is a project per se in Jira or some other system. So, and then if you have another page, that's another project, and another page, that's another project. So you end up with a bit of a management problem with the current tooling as far as planning.
Absolutely. And I think this is also, once you go to a service-based thing, like the whole notion, or the reason people have that kind of dependence on burn downs with releases, like, I'm going to continuously deploy something, and release is really like a marketing activity. So, like, the whole thing sort of gets turned on its head.
I actually made a decision a couple of days ago to completely abolish the concept of releases as a whole.
That's the right answer.
I saw you tweeting about that. You're like, well, there's no releases anymore. I update my microservices, and that's what I do.
Exactly. The application, you don't have an application 1.0. It's made up of multiple services. There's no such thing as 1.0. The only thing I use releases for, such as in a Maven, Palm, or Gradle, would be to roll it back if something broke, and that's it.
From an operational perspective, there's still a high value to having some sort of unique identifier to what code is running, but the whole notion of release, in my mind, kind of goes back to this anachronistic world where software was delivered on CDs, and we're just kind of finally evolving to the point where what the internet enables is really being leveraged.
Exactly. It's going into the logic of whether it be software as a service, where we're going to do a quarter release, but if you really embrace it, there's no such thing as a release. It's just a new feature that shows up today.
And that's a natural evolution, right? Like, that's where all these other places have gotten. Wealthfront, Netflix, Amazon, they're constantly updating their services all day, every day.
I think that is a little easier if you don't have people with an expectation of how a certain feature is going to work. Like, say you're providing an API and then you have breaking changes in it. Having used the Open Graph API in like 2013, I'm going to say Facebook, for example, making changes all the time meant that Facebook broke things all the time. And I know that they eventually moved away from that whole let's break things all the time motto. But in terms of like, I would say continuous delivery and continuous deployment aren't the same thing even, because you can do stuff with feature flagging or whatever, so that you don't have to make breaking changes even if you're deploying new code.
So doing changes to your code doesn't necessarily mean things have to break, and I think this goes back to, or it's a different framing of the notion of contracts and promises, and this is in a sense it's a user experience question, right? Like what do you want your users to experience? And there's certainly times when you should have changes that probably break things, but there's also ways that those can be based on some sort of contractual promise, and that could be, everything could be version, there could be some negotiation, but if you want to change something and you never told anyone that you're going to change it and it's going to break their expectation, then no matter what that is, if that's a button, if that's an API, then that's a negative user experience. And if you are willing to take that, if the new world that you're creating is so much better that you're willing to create that negative user experience in the transition, then that's your kind of business-driven decision. But you should recognize that's what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's definitely a risk to it. One method would be to show something on a page saying these are the new things that happened last night. A certain amount of chaos.
Well, I think no one can keep up with it. The way that I frame this, or the way I think about this from a kind of a product perspective, is that it behooves you in this new world where you're updating things constantly to create user experiences that are so compelling and intuitive that people just kind of get this new functionality, and it's welcome, right? And if you do that right, and I can tell you from personal experience where I feel like applications do a great job of this, and I'm sure we also all have examples where we think the applications do a poor job of this.
One thing that I hear a lot from people, though, is like this is not all just front-end apps. I mean, a lot of the things that people are using Cloud Foundry to Spring to do is back-end data integration, data API.
I didn't say anything about front-end, right? Like user experience is the API. To me, API design is a user experience exercise.
I get you. I'm just saying that like there is I get a lot of questions, which is like, how do I do Agile for my back-end business system API development? Like, this is not where I'm getting user feedback or I'm driving something like that. It's like I'm literally designing the back-end payment gateway system for a bank, like, and it's going to run for a long number of years. And I think that's an area where there haven't been as many leaders out there. Like, it's not like there's a lot of these folks that have come out talking about that.
It's that missing architecture manual that I want someone needs to publish.
Yeah, you should talk a little bit about Spring Cloud Data Flow on that topic, right? Because it's the definition of sort of data-centric and back-endy.
It is extremely data-centric and back-endy. It's basically a framework, extending, leveraging Spring Boot and more a lot of the Cloud Foundry, process management and scheduling to give you a framework to build, relatively easy. And Tushar kind of mentioned how it worked to connect to a database, but this is using this framework to connect to sources and sinks in a way that unifies both the streaming and the batching model, and gives you. It doesn't. Going back to the hard problems, if this is the hard problem, it doesn't necessarily solve getting all of your data sources and sinks set up and operationalized. But if those exist, then it gives you a quick way to drop in a bunch of kind of flexible algorithms for doing that kind of processing and doing interesting things with it. And I'm pretty excited about. I was actually blown away, and we did some Spring XD stuff on Cloud Foundry After Dark before, and in my introduction to it, I was blown away by what it's already capable of.
Well, and I think to Bridget's curiosity, the thing that the Spring Cloud data flow does is it gives those data services, data microservices, if you will, the same operational characteristics or similar operational characteristics to the rest of the system. And so you don't have a lot of static setup, static scale, and it's basically brought all of that to be native behaviors on the platform with Cloud Foundry and to have the same kind of configuration ease as Spring Boot. So you've really extended the paradigm, and it's sort of like, well, what's the difference between Spring XD and Spring Cloud Data Flow? And a lot of it's actually operational, which again, we're taking developers and be like, no, think about the operational, life cycle here of when you write this.
Well, in some sense, going back to Bridget's question, you're kind of taking the necessity for them to think about a lot of those aspects out of it. It's just like free for choosing that framework. You get that for free, yeah. and then what Spring XD or Dataflow is allowing you to do is really focus on your domain, right? And then this domain happens to be all about data processing and streaming and analytics, and then you could connect that just because it's all really part of the same thing to your app. So, it's really blurring the line between what is data processing and analytics and app development in a way that I think will be meaningful for a lot of these organizations that are trying to solve these problems, which is basically all of them.
So that actually brings up another interesting question, well, interesting to me anyway, which is one of the things that can make, when you're working with a bunch of stateful data, make a rapid iteration, especially in a monolith, of course, challenging or difficult, is dealing with the data, dealing with like schema migrations, that sort of thing. What are some of the ways that this could make that easier?
In some sense, I think that like the whole notion of schema migrations is not necessarily like a cloud native way, right? Like the databases you're talking about are like kind of relational databases are not cloud native. Like you can manage them in kind of a cloud native way, but like the quality of those types of databases is not this sort of peerless system where you can add capacity to the pool and take it out without dealing with it. You have to kind of adhere to a pretty strict contract about what the schema is on both sides. Where the NoSQL movement, while is provenly imperfect, thank you, Kyle Kingsbury, but like it definitely tried to capture some of these notions about more flexibility in the contracts between both sides of that, so that you can do things without you could actually change the underlying quote unquote schema in a document model without breaking the code on the client side.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I get that. I've totally been on the app side of running, document data stores in production with all of the fun that implies. But to Waters' point, he was mentioning banks. Presumably, they are still probably using something with a little bit more handshaking. So, like, how does the cloud native aspiring organization that also has a bunch of SQL manage that?
Well, I'll let James finish after 1 second, but like those are still hard problems that haven't been, I would say, adequately natively brought into the cloud as a solution. There's certainly work we're done on the Galera clustering and some of that stuff. Although Kyle showed a couple of edge cases with that, but these data kind of consistency problems don't automatically go away when you all of a sudden want to go to the cloud. What's your thoughts there, James?
It was interesting. I just mentioned that the Netflix team that spoke at SpringOne was actually their back-end payment team that was responsible for all payment transactions. And they were especially proud that they managed to do this using their approach of microservices, Cassandra, all these other things for all of Netflix's payments. So I'd love to have them talk a little bit more about how they did that in the data side. I know that they notoriously try to use just microservices and Cassandra to get everything they want done. Therefore, a lot of the things that look like schema happen in the app versus in the kind of the database in a more difficult to migrate way. But I think database operations and this kind of thing is the uncharted territory of cloud native, and I think if you were going to try to be a stick in the mud Luddite and say this is a stupid idea, don't do it, you put your feet in the ground and be like everything has to be a transactional SQL thing and there's no magic there yet, so this is all hype. You know what I mean? But so I think it gives me hope that there's a lot of people disproving that, and to hear the payments team at Netflix use the same model, it's not like they're like, no, we got to go get Oracle and WebLogic again.
I think that it's if you look at that landscape, Cassandra is decidedly a cloud-native database, right? A cloud-native data system. It has a bunch of these properties we're talking about with fault tolerance and the rest of that. And so the thing that you're seeing in the kind of cloud-native evolution, inspired by kind of building these highly available transactional systems, is recognizing that you're maybe giving up certain aspects of consistency, but you can manage that with logic at the level of the application, and that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, and you should mention, we are at Cassandra conference this week. Your team's there.
Absolutely.
And we have a Bosch managed Cassandra cluster that's updatable, upgradable, and expandable coming soon, all managed by the platform coming, because we don't just want to tell you to go do cloud native. We wanted to have the data services along it to back it up. So I'm actually really excited about our Cassandra work as its own kind of community to go get to know really well. And I hope over the next year that we have a great relationship with the Cassandra community given this work.
And this is very exciting for me. I've been wanting an excuse to play with Cassandra.
You got it.
Especially because I hear good things about it. I mean, like the folks at PagerDuty use Cassandra, and I figure, of course, yes, you want all your banking transactions to be reliable, but I think ops people also are very concerned with their alerts being reliable. So it's like, oh, PagerDuty uses Cassandra. It must not be terrible.
This whole pivotal thing is just a strategy to play with these toys, basically.
Hey, if it works for you.
I know when it comes to us with the whole database thing and able to do migrations, I'm a little more traditional. It's Liquibase, good old MySQL, Postgres, something like that, and Liquibase handles the migrations and the code deployment. And typically a database, even though it is relational, it's really just one domain. And all of the interaction between those domains is happening via REST API or some other form of API. But Liquibase is how I handle migrations.
So I think this is an interesting context. And when you go to a microservice architecture, what that allows you to do is make those domains small enough that you can kind of reasonably scale them without breaking a lot of stuff. Where if you have a bunch of kind of monolithic stuff backed by one database, and then you have a migration that is non-compatible with different versions of the code, like you have to come up with these, and I've done this before, kind of these juggling strategies or caching strategies where half the app is in one state, half the app is in the other state. Maybe you have two databases for a minute to try to get things over to the new schema. And if you go to a microservice architecture, then your bounded contexts are small enough, like it solves a bunch of those problems where you could just do that migration really quick, roll it all out in kind of this way that never causes or has those big problems that you had with the big monolithic databases.
Yeah, definitely for us. I have not experienced any type of a problem with one database affecting another database because they are small enough. The problem, however, there is something lurking in the back, and that is relationships are much harder because I don't have a database to do it anymore.
Absolutely.
So, I didn't fix everything. I made another problem, but I'm okay with that.
What it basically means is that you're going to do your joins in your code, in a sense, instead of like at the database engine.
Exactly. And the benefit to that being that my databases are tiny. From a domain perspective.
Do you have like one database per microservice kind of as per usual, or what's the actual layout? Just you should tell people how you set it up.
Definitely one per service.
Yeah.
And if it was a contact, that would be one database, and that's it. We take some abstraction even further, and phone number is another database. It can vary depending on the complexity needed.
And then do you use RDS to set up those databases or to make them easier to manage, or do you just put them in a container?
RDS.
Okay, got it.
I don't trust containers that much.
See, this is the classic thing where everyone in the container community to some extent is like, let's try to run everything in this. I'm like, just get your 12-factor apps there first. Like, that would be a good thing. But I always like hearing real-time data points from people that make their living with the app that they're talking about. So that's cool to hear.
So we're over an hour on the first episode of Cloud Native After Dark, and I know this will be one of many. But is there any last words, or do we do secrets? Is there any new traditions we're starting? I thought it was an interesting conversation. Hopefully we'll have many more, and I'm looking forward to like kind of expanding the number of communities that can participate in this ungodly hour of discussion.
I'll definitely participate every time I'm in Europe.
Or Asia.
Well, actually, I'm weird. I'll still work till about 4 or 5. So.
Yeah, because you talked to India from Steamboat, so this is actually great time for you.
Exactly, it's my daytime.
How's your site running? Did you have any problems on ECS with your site today?
No, actually.
Yeah. Good.
But we do nothing with DynamoDB, so.
Makes sense.
So they are, unless there's a secret or some parting words, I think we should.
Dude, secrets are a CFAD thing. This is CNAD. This is like, we don't have secrets. That was a CFAD thing.
Oh, Waters.
We should still have some connection to the past.
If there's embargoed announcements, Waters is going to tell us stuff.
I was doing that at the beginning to like kind of make it fun, or like people wanted to watch to the end. But then the thing actually got so organically like popular that I almost didn't want to do the secrets anymore, because like secrets were fun for like a small group of like 6 people that were crazy enough to watch the thing. And once we started getting 500 views, I was like, this isn't a secret. This is like a billboard.
I was actually just going to say that having your persistence layer in a container that's designed to be ephemeral is what I would consider to be an anti-pattern. I mean, you still have to have it being written out somewhere.
Make sure it goes on an ephemeral disk too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I think this is great. This is fantastic. I like the slightly broader reaching topic, so that people who are cloud native interested, but maybe still have a giant question mark where Cloud Foundry is, can still feel like they can join. I mean, I felt like I could join before I had any idea what Cloud Foundry was. I think I asked Waters to explain what it was, and I still didn't get it. So maybe fixing that is my job.
The unattainable is unknown.
It's the #1 platform for running Spring Boot. How's that as a very succinct answer for you now?
It's a great answer that some people would then reply back to you with, and what is Spring Boot?
Far less people would say that.
If you have to ask, maybe you'll never.
Like as I was pointing out today, Salesforce has job listings for Spring Boot developers. So like this thing is so ubiquitous, and IBM, Google, and even our best friends at Red Hat all have tutorials about how to use Spring Boot in their platforms. So Spring Boot is one of those things that to the right crowd needs no introduction. So it's kind of fun.
And that crowd grows every day.
It's pretty great.
It's a viral bulldozer.
It's a little viral bulldozer.
All right, I have to get up and take my kids to school, so I'm going to go to bed. Unless someone else wants to stay and talk all night. I know Spence could do it, but
I have 11 Fortune 200 briefings this week in the office, so I better get some sleep for those.
Sounds like a plan.
Only 11? You're trying to cut back, or what?
Yeah, I'm cutting back.
All right. Until next time, as always, it was a pleasure. We'll do it again. Cloud Native.